3 days. I spent 3 entire days preparing for this moment. My hands, now bearing the small spots and lines that revelam meus 65 anos, worked tirelessly chopping, stirring, and baking. Every dish was selected with care. Thomas's favorite lasagna with the homemade sauce that takes 5 hours to simmer properly. Melissa's beloved chocolate cake with raspberry filling that she's requested for every birthday since she was 8. Little Sophie and Lucas's mac and cheese with the secret ingredient that always makes them ask for seconds. Even Victoria's complicated dietary preferences were accommodated with a gluten-free quiche that took 3 attempts to perfect. My modest dining room had never looked more beautiful. The table I'd saved for months to buy when the children were small gleamed under a fresh coat of polish. Family photos spanning decades lined the buffet. Thomas's graduation, Melissa's wedding to David, God rest his soul, Amber's first steps, the twins' birth, 65 years of life, 40 years of teaching high school English, and 20 years of holding this family together since Philip walked out, all represented in this carefully curated celebration. They'll be here at 1, I reminded myself, adjusting the handwritten place cards one final time. I'd even made one for Philip, despite our complicated history. After all, he was still the children's father, and in recent years we'd managed a civil relationship for family gatherings. Though lately, those gatherings had become increasingly rare. By 1:30, the lasagna was cooling too much. I sent a quick text to Thomas. Everything's ready whenever you are. Did traffic hold you up? By 2, I called Melissa, straight to voicemail. By 2:30, I tried Amber, my usually responsive granddaughter. Nothing. At 3, I sent a group message. Is everyone okay? Getting worried? Food's getting cold? At 3:30, I called Thomas's house. No answer. By 4 o'clock, I sat alone at my carefully set table, the food untouched, the candles burned down, staring at my silent phone. Had there been a terrible accident? Should I call hospitals? The police? Then my phone pinged. Thomas had sent a photo, a group shot of my entire family gathered around an elegant table in what was clearly Patricia Henderson's sunroom. There was Thomas with his arm around Victoria. There were Sophie and Lucas with desserts that definitely weren't from my kitchen. There was Melissa raising a champagne flute and Amber taking a selfie with Philip. My ex-husband was not only there, but seated beside Patricia, looking far too comfortable. The message below the photo read, "Sorry, Mom. Completely forgot to tell you. Patricia insisted on hosting a special brunch today and wouldn't take no for an answer. The kids had soccer after and Melissa needed to take Amber shopping for college. Rain check on your birthday? Next weekend maybe? Love you." The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. Not only had they forgotten my birthday celebration, one I'd been planning and discussing for weeks, but they were all together, celebrating something else, with someone else. With trembling hands, I scrolled through more photos Thomas had inexplicably included. Everyone laughing, Philip helping Patricia serve drinks, a cake, an actual birthday cake, being presented to the group. I zoomed in on the cake. In elegant frosting it read, "Celebrating Patricia's generosity. Thanks for the Aspen trip." So that was it. Patricia had bought my family's affection with the promise of a ski vacation. And they had all chosen her extravagant brunch over the modest celebration I'd spent days preparing, including Philip, especially Philip, who seemed particularly cozy with Patricia in several photos. I set my phone down and surveyed the silent room, the perfect table setting, the cooling food that represented hours of work and love. Something inside me, something that had been bending for years, finally snapped. For 2 decades, since Philip left me for his younger co-worker, who ironically left him just 3 years later, I dedicated myself to holding our family together. I'd worked extra tutoring jobs to help put Thomas through business school. I'd moved Melissa and little Amber into my home after David's sudden death. I'd been the steady, reliable, always available mother and grandmother, the one who remembered birthdays, attended school events, and was there for every crisis, large and small. And this was my reward, an empty table on my 65th birthday. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting after hours of cooking. With mechanical movements, I began packing up the untouched food, the lasagna, the quiche, the mac and cheese, the cake. All of it went into containers, then into the freezer. I wouldn't waste it, even if they had wasted my time and heart. As I cleaned, a memory surfaced, A conversation with my attorney last week. I'd finally received the inheritance from my father's estate, a sum that wasn't extravagant but was substantial enough that I'd planned to divide it among Thomas, Melissa, and my grandchildren. The paperwork was ready. I'd planned to tell them today over birthday cake, but now, I picked up my phone and called my attorney's office, surprised to find him still working on a Saturday. James? It's Rose Parker. About that inheritance paperwork. I need to make a change. Of course, Rose. What did you have in mind? I looked at the message from Thomas again, at the smiling faces gathered around Patricia's table. Everything we discussed about dividing it among my children and grandchildren, I want to put that on hold. May I ask why? Let's just say I'm reconsidering my options. In the meantime, I'd like to access some of those funds immediately. I have some plans to make. After hanging up, I did something I hadn't done in years. I poured myself a generous glass of wine and opened my laptop. Within an hour, I had booked a 3-week tour of the Italian countryside, a dream I'd deferred for decades while putting everyone else first. The following days passed in a blur of preparations. I told no one of my plans, not even responding to the belated birthday messages and half-hearted apologies that trickled in. Thomas stopped by briefly on Wednesday, leaving a hastily wrapped gift on my kitchen counter. A generic scarf that still had the clearance tag partially visible. Patricia's organizing an amazing ski trip to Aspen for all of us this winter, he mentioned, barely looking up from his phone. She wants you to come too, of course. How generous of her, I replied neutrally. She's been amazing, honestly. The twins adore her, and she's been really helpful with some investment advice for me. Even helped Melissa find a better apartment. I nodded, saying nothing about how I'd offered similar help to Melissa and been politely declined. Oh, and you'll never guess who's been joining us for Sunday dinners at Patricia's. Dad? Isn't that weird? But nice, I guess, for us all to be together. Fascinating, I murmured, as pieces began clicking into place in my mind. After Thomas left, I made one more call to a private investigator recommended by a colleague from school. My suspicions had been growing, and I needed answers before I left. 2 days before my departure for Italy, the investigator delivered a thick envelope to my door. I spent that evening reviewing its contents, each page more shocking than the last. By morning, I had made copies and organized them with clear tabs and explanatory notes. On Friday, the day before my flight, I asked Thomas to stop by, saying I had some important documents for him. He arrived late, clearly impatient. I can only stay a minute, Mom. We're all meeting at Patricia's for dinner. This won't take long, I said, handing him the sealed envelope. But I want you to promise me you'll open this and review everything inside. It's important. What is it? Tax stuff? He barely glanced at it. It's about Patricia. And your father. That caught his attention. What about them? Just read it, Thomas. Call me after you do. He frowned, tucking the envelope under his arm. Okay, whatever. I gotta run. I watched him drive away, knowing that the contents of that envelope would shatter the perfect world Patricia had constructed. Evidence of her year-long affair with Philip, documentation of how she'd manipulated my family away from me, financial records showing suspicious timing of her generous gifts, always coinciding with my planned family events. And most damning of all, recorded conversations between her and Philip discussing my father's inheritance, money they somehow knew about, despite my never mentioning it to anyone but my attorney. The last item in the envelope was a simple note from me. By the time you read this, I'll be on my way to Italy. 3 weeks, no contact. You all have some decisions to make about what kind of family you want to be. I've already made mine. I turned off my phone at exactly 4 p.m., just as my taxi arrived to take me to the airport hotel where I'd stay before my early morning flight. I estimated Thomas would open the envelope around 7 p.m. after dinner at Patricia's. By 8 p.m., my family's carefully constructed illusions would be shattered. But I wouldn't be there to pick up the pieces this time. For once in my life, I was putting myself first. As the taxi pulled away from the house that had witnessed so much family history, both joyful and painful, I felt a curious lightness. 65 years had taught me many things, but apparently I was still capable of learning new lessons. And this one was long overdue. At precisely 6:42 a.m., as my plane lifted off American soil, I experienced a sensation I hadn't felt in decades: complete freedom. No responsibilities to anyone but myself. No meals to prepare. No emotions to manage. no disappointments to swallow with a smile. I imagined the scene unfolding back home. Thomas would have opened the envelope by now. The carefully organized evidence would have made its way through the family. Phones would be ringing. Messages would be flying. And for the first time in 20 years, I wouldn't be the one mediating, explaining, smoothing things over. First time in Italy? The elderly woman beside me interrupted my thoughts, her accent distinctly New York. First time anywhere in a very long time, I admitted. Traveling alone? When I nodded, she smiled knowingly. Good for you, honey. Took me until my 70s to do that. My only regret is not doing it sooner. As we soared over the Atlantic, I felt a moment of doubt. Had I been too harsh? Too dramatic? Perhaps I should have confronted them directly instead of this theatrical departure. Then I remembered sitting alone at my birthday table, the candles burning down while my family celebrated with Patricia. I remembered years of gradually being sidelined, invitations declined, advice ignored, presents increasingly treated as an obligation rather than a desire. No, I had given them decades of chances. This was my time now. Meanwhile, 12 hours earlier, Thomas had arrived at Patricia's elegant, Tudor-style home, the mysterious envelope from his mother tucked carelessly under a stack of files in his car. He'd forgotten about it entirely until Patricia's butler took his briefcase, dislodging the envelope which fell to the marble floor of the entryway. "What's that, darling?" Victoria asked, adjusting her pearl earrings, a recent gift from her mother. "Something from Mom. Probably birthday thank you cards or something." He tucked it into his jacket pocket and promptly forgot about it again. Patricia Henderson's dinner parties were legendary in their social circle. Tonight was no exception. Crystal glittering under custom lighting, floral arrangements that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, and staff moving invisibly to ensure every need was anticipated. Patricia herself presided over the gathering with practiced charm, her sleek silver bob and tailored designer dress projecting exactly the image she cultivated. Sophisticated, generous, indispensable. "Thomas, Victoria, finally," she trilled, air-kissing her daughter and clasping Thomas's hands. "Philip just arrived, and Melissa and Amber are already in the conservatory." Thomas noted his father standing by the fireplace, looking unexpectedly distinguished in a new sports coat Thomas hadn't seen before. When had his father started dressing so well? It was a marked improvement from the rumpled community college professor he'd been during Thomas's childhood. The evening progressed pleasantly through cocktails and into dinner, the conversation flowing as smoothly as the expensive wine. "I've finalized all the arrangements for Aspen," Patricia announced over the main course. "The chalet has 6 bedrooms, a private chef, and the most breathtaking mountain views." "Mom, you're too generous," Victoria beamed. "The twins will be beside themselves." "What about Rose?" Philip asked, swirling his wine with practiced elegance. "Will she be joining us?" Something in his tone made Thomas glance up sharply. There was a tension in his father's casual inquiry that seemed odd. "I mentioned it to her," Thomas replied. "She didn't seem particularly interested." "Your mother prefers simpler activities," Patricia interjected smoothly. "Not everyone appreciates the finer experiences." Melissa frowned slightly. "Mom used to ski, though. She's the one who taught us, remember?" "When was the last time she actually went, though?" Thomas countered. "She's always saying she can't afford trips like that." "Perhaps she's being practical," Philip suggested, "especially with her inheritance situation still being sorted out." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Thomas stared at his father. "What inheritance situation?" Philip froze momentarily, then recovered. "Oh, I assumed she'd told you. Your grandfather's estate was finally settled. Nothing extravagant, but a tidy sum from what I understand." "How would you know about that?" Melissa asked, her voice sharper than usual. "You and Mom barely communicate except through us." Before Philip could respond, Patricia intervened. "More wine, everyone, and wait until you hear about the spa services at the chalet." The moment passed, but something about it lingered in Thomas's mind. After dessert, he excused himself to make a call and found himself alone in Patricia's study. As he waited for his client to answer, the envelope in his pocket pressed against his chest, his mother's words echoing, "It's about Patricia and your father." Curiosity finally winning, he opened it. Inside, he found meticulously organized documents, each section clearly labeled and annotated in his mother's precise handwriting. The first section contained photos, Surveillance images of his father and Patricia together in situations that couldn't be misinterpreted. Dinner at intimate restaurants, entering a hotel together, holding hands in a park 2 hours from town. "What the hell?" Thomas whispered, flipping through image after damning image. The next section contained financial records, transfers between accounts, investment documents, property assessments. With growing horror, he realized these showed his father and Patricia had been financially entangled for over a year. Most disturbing was a document showing Patricia had quietly purchased the mortgage on his mother's house 6 months ago through a shell company. His hands trembling now, Thomas turned to the third section. Printed email exchanges between Philip and Patricia discussing Rose's inheritance and how to ensure it benefits the family appropriately. Their thinly veiled strategy was clear. Isolate Rose from her family through competing events and undermining her relationships, then position Philip to influence how she distributed her inheritance. The final section was the most damning. Transcripts of recorded conversations between Patricia and Philip. Patricia: "Has she said anything more about the inheritance?" Philip: "Not directly, but James confirmed the money was transferred last week, nearly $300,000. Patricia: "And she still plans to give it to the kids?" Philip: "That's always been her intention. Boring and predictable as always." Patricia: "Well, she won't be distributing anything if she's too busy planning that ridiculous birthday dinner no one's attending. You did make sure Thomas understood they're all expected here instead." Philip: "Victoria handled that. Rose will be sitting alone with her homemade lasagna while we're all here celebrating your generosity." Again. Patricia laughs. "Perfect. Another holiday she'll spend alone, wondering why her family always chooses me. It's almost too easy." Philip: "Just remember our arrangement. When I help deliver her inheritance to this family, I get my fair share." Patricia: "Of course, darling. You've been so helpful in bringing everyone into my orbit, though I still don't understand why she never suspected anything between us." Philip: "Rose only sees what she expects to see. Always has. It's what made her so easy to leave 20 years ago, and it's what makes her so easy to manipulate now." Thomas felt physically ill. He turned to the final page, a brief note from his mother explaining she would be in Italy for 3 weeks, unreachable, while they all reconsidered what kind of family they wanted to be. The study door opened, and Victoria appeared. "There you are. Mother's about to tell everyone about the Christmas surprise she's planned." Thomas stared at his wife, suddenly seeing her in a new light. "Did you know?" "Know what?" He held up the surveillance photos of Patricia and his father. "About this." "About any of this?" Victoria's expression shifted from confusion to shock to something harder to read. "Thomas, I can explain." "So you did know." His voice was dangerously quiet. "You knew your mother and my father were having an affair. You knew they were deliberately isolating my mother from her own family." "It's more complicated than that," Victoria protested, closing the door behind her. "Is it? Is it complicated that we all skipped my mother's 65th birthday, an event she spent days preparing for, to attend your mother's manipulative brunch? Is it complicated that your mother bought my mother's mortgage without her knowledge? Or that she and my father have been plotting to get their hands on my grandfather's inheritance?" Victoria paled. "The inheritance part. I didn't know about that. But the affair? The deliberate scheduling conflicts? The systematic campaign to make my mother feel unwanted by her own family?" Her silence was answer enough. Thomas gathered the papers with shaking hands. "I need to show this to Melissa. Then we're leaving." "Thomas, please don't!" He pushed past her, his mind reeling. "Just don't." 20 minutes later, the elegant dinner party had devolved into chaos. Melissa, upon seeing the evidence, had confronted Philip publicly, her voice rising with each devastating revelation. Amber, horrified to discover the grandmother who had helped raise her had been deliberately excluded and manipulated, was in tears. Patricia's attempts to regain control of the situation only made things worse, especially when she slipped and referred to Rose's inheritance as wasted on someone who doesn't appreciate the finer things. By 9 p.m., Thomas had tried calling his mother 17 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. The simple message she'd left became increasingly ominous. She was gone, unreachable, for 3 weeks. "What have we done?" Melissa whispered. As they sat in Thomas's car outside Patricia's house, the evidence spread between them. "How did we not see this happening?" Thomas had no answer. He only knew that the mother who had always been their safety net, their constant support, their unwavering foundation, had finally reached her breaking point, and he wasn't sure if anything would ever be the same again. The morning sunlight streamed through wooden shutters, casting golden patterns across my bed at the small family-owned villa in Montepulciano. For a moment, disoriented from jet lag, I forgot where I was, or rather, where I wasn't. I wasn't in my modest home with its familiar creaks and drafts. I wasn't waking to a day of others' needs and expectations. I was in Tuscany, alone, by choice. Rolling over, I checked my phone out of habit, then remembered I'd turned it off before boarding my flight. 3 days of blessed silence. No frantic calls from Thomas. No guilt-inducing messages from Melissa. No manipulative overtures from Philip. Instead, the only sounds were church bells in the distance and birds conversing outside my window. I stretched luxuriously, feeling lighter than I had in years. At breakfast in the villa's sun-dappled courtyard, I met my tour companions, 8 other travelers, most older than me, all women except for a gay couple in their 70s. No one knew my story. No one had expectations. I was simply Rose, the retired English teacher from Boston, embarking on her first European adventure. "First day in Tuscany," announced Francesca, our Italian guide. "We begin with a walking tour of Montepulciano, then wine tasting at a family vineyard, followed by a cooking class this evening. Prepare your senses for pleasure, yes? Pleasure. When was the last time I'd prioritized my own pleasure? Even simple indulgences had always been tinged with guilt or practical considerations. But here, surrounded by strangers in this ancient landscape, I gave myself permission to simply experience joy. The cobblestone streets wound uphill, each turn revealing new wonders. A tiny chapel with frescoes painted by a Renaissance master, a workshop where an artisan crafted leather using techniques unchanged for centuries, a panoramic view of rolling vineyards stretching to the horizon. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said Margot, a silver-haired widow from Chicago who had fallen into step beside me. "First time I came to Italy was after my Harold died. Thought I was running away from grief, but turns out I was running toward living again." "I'm not running from grief," I said, surprising myself with my candor. "More like running from invisibility." Margot nodded knowingly. "Ah, the great female disappearing act. Happens to the best of us. Mother, wife, grandmother, so many roles that eventually swallow who we actually are." Her words struck a chord so deep I nearly gasped. That was exactly it. I had become so consumed by my roles that Rose herself had vanished. By afternoon, warmed by Tuscan sun and local wine, I felt myself beginning to emerge from a chrysalis I hadn't even realized had enclosed me. We sat at a long wooden table overlooking the vineyard, learning about the Sangiovese grapes that had grown in this soil for generations. "This wine," said the weathered vineyard owner Paolo, "it must breathe before you can appreciate its full character. We age it in oak, then in bottles, and still it needs air, needs to open itself, before it reveals its true essence." I sipped the ruby liquid, feeling it warm a path through my body. Perhaps I too needed to breathe, to open, to rediscover my true essence after years of being contained. That evening, during our cooking class, I found myself laughing genuinely for the first time in months as we struggled with pasta dough and debated the proper amount of garlic for authentic pomodoro sauce. My hands, which had prepared thousands of meals for others, now created something solely for my own pleasure. Later, falling into bed pleasantly exhausted and slightly wine-flushed, I allowed myself to wonder briefly about the chaos unfolding at home. Had they truly understood the evidence I'd provided? Were they remorseful or merely scrambling to control the damage? Did they miss me at all? Or just the services I provided? For once, I let these questions drift away unanswered. Their reactions were no longer my responsibility to manage. For the next 3 weeks, my only obligation was to myself. Meanwhile, back in Boston, the Parker family was in turmoil. "She's turned off Find My Friends," Thomas reported, pacing his living room where Melissa, Amber, and a subdued Victoria had gathered. "And she's not answering emails either. Did you try her friend Susan from the school?" Melissa suggested, her eyes red from crying. "They sometimes have lunch together." "So Susan says Mom mentioned a trip but was vague about details. Said Mom seemed happier than she's been in years," Thomas ran a hand through his disheveled hair. How did we not notice how unhappy she's been? Because we weren't looking, Amber said quietly. Her young face was taut with anger and disappointment, not just at the adults around her, but at herself as well. None of us were. Victoria sat slightly apart, her usual confidence diminished. The previous night's confrontation had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about her mother, her marriage, and her own complicity in Rose's isolation. We need to find her, Thomas insisted. Make sure she's safe. She's a grown woman, not a lost child, Melissa countered. And honestly, after what we did, what we've been doing for years without even realizing it, maybe we should respect her wish for space. Space is one thing, Thomas argued. Disappearing to another continent without telling anyone exactly where is something else entirely. She told James Hoffman, Victoria interjected. All eyes turned to her. Her attorney. That's how Patricia knew about the inheritance. My mother. She has a contact in his office. The silence that followed was deafening. So your mother has been spying on mine through her attorney's office? Thomas finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Victoria flinched. I didn't know until recently. I swear. But you didn't tell us when you did find out, Melissa pointed out. Just like you didn't tell us about Mom's birthday dinner, even though I specifically asked if you were sure she hadn't planned anything. I was trying to keep the peace, Victoria protested weakly. No, Thomas said, the realization dawning in his expression. You were choosing your mother over my family, over our family. You've been doing it for years. Victoria's face crumpled. That's not fair, isn't it? Amber challenged. Grandma Rose has been there for all of us, always. When Dad died, her voice caught on the memory. She moved us into her home, helped me through the worst time of my life. And how do we repay her? By forgetting her birthday for some fancy brunch with the woman who's been deliberately trying to push her out of our lives. The doorbell interrupted the tense conversation. Thomas opened it to find his father standing on the porch, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Is your mother here? Philip asked without preamble. Seriously? Thomas stepped back, allowing his father to enter but making his displeasure evident. You think she'd come here after what you've done? Philip had the grace to look uncomfortable as he faced the assembled family, all regarding him with varying degrees of hurt and anger. I can explain, he began. Save it, Melissa cut him off. We've seen the evidence, the photos, the emails, the recorded conversations. Did you really think we'd never find out you and Patricia were using us to get to Mom's inheritance? It wasn't like that, Philip protested. Or it didn't start like that. How did it start then? Thomas demanded. When exactly did you begin sleeping with Victoria's mother and plotting to manipulate your ex-wife? Philip sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. Patricia and I reconnected at Sophie's birthday party last year. It just happened. The financial discussions came later, after she mentioned Rose might be coming into some money. And that justified systematically isolating Mom from her family? Melissa's voice trembled with fury. Scheduling competing events to ensure she'd be alone on holidays? Undermining her relationship with her own grandchildren? Where is she? Philip asked, ignoring the accusations. Patricia says she's left the country. Italy, Thomas confirmed coldly. Beyond that, we don't know. And even if we did, we wouldn't tell you. She'll cool down, Philip said, with the dismissive confidence of a man accustomed to women accommodating his behavior. She always does. Remember when I left? Everyone thought she'd fall apart, but she just kept going, taking care of everyone else like always. That's not cooling down, Amber interjected, her young voice cutting through the room. That's suppressing her own pain to protect everyone around her. There's a difference. Philip stared at his granddaughter, seemingly taken aback by her insight. You never deserved her, Melissa said quietly. None of us did, but at least the rest of us are starting to realize that. As Philip left, chastened but not truly remorseful, the remaining family members faced each other in silence, the weight of their collective failure settling over them. What do we do now? Victoria finally asked. We wait, Thomas replied. And while we wait, we take a hard look at how we got here, and how we make sure Mom knows she matters to us when she returns. If she returns, Amber murmured, giving voice to the fear they all shared, but none had dared to speak. In the growing silence, the empty space where Rose should have been seemed to expand, becoming a presence itself, a testament to how profoundly her absence was finally being felt. The Amalfi Coast unfolded before me like a vivid dream, vertiginous cliffs plunging into azure waters, pastel-colored villages clinging impossibly to mountainsides, lemon groves perfuming the air. By the 10th day of my Italian sojourn, I'd settled into a pleasant rhythm of discovery and rest, allowing each experience to wash over me without the constant mental arithmetic of others' needs and preferences. "You've changed since Montepulciano," observed Margot as we shared a lemon granita at a cafe overlooking Positano's beach. The tour group had bonded quickly, but Margot and I had formed a particular connection, recognizing in each other women reclaiming their identities after years of self-erasure. "Have I?" I licked tart sweetness from my spoon, savoring the simple pleasure. You've relaxed. When we started, you kept checking your phone even though it was off. You'd get this worried look, like you were calculating the cost of enjoying yourself." I laughed softly. "That obvious, was it? To another recovering people-pleaser? Absolutely." She tilted her head, studying me. "Want to talk about it yet? Whatever cataclysm propelled you across an ocean with 3 weeks' notice?" Until now, I'd shared only the barest outline of my situation with my new friends. But sitting there, with the Mediterranean glittering below and the scent of lemons in the air, I found myself wanting to give voice to my experience. "My family forgot my 65th birthday," I began. "Or rather, they chose to attend another event instead, a brunch hosted by my son's mother-in-law, who I've recently discovered has been systematically undermining my relationship with my children and grandchildren for years." Margot's eyebrows rose. "That's quite the opening line." Over the next hour, the whole sordid tale spilled out. Philip's betrayal 20 years ago and his apparent new betrayal with Patricia, the gradual erosion of my central role in the family, the discovery of their manipulation and financial scheming, my dramatic departure. The strangest part, I concluded, is that I don't feel guilty. I've spent 2 decades feeling responsible for everyone else's happiness, and now I just don't. "Good," Margot said firmly. "Guilt is useless in your situation. Tell me, what happens when you go back?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on escaping that I'd given little thought to my eventual return. I suppose that depends on them, on whether they've truly understood what they've done, or if they're just scrambling to maintain the status quo. "No," Margot shook her head. "It depends on you, on what you're willing to accept going forward. That's the hard part of awakening to your own worth. You can't go back to sleep." Her words stayed with me as we continued our coastal exploration. That evening, in the privacy of my hotel room, I finally turned on my phone. The screen immediately exploded with notifications, dozens of missed calls, over 100 text messages, countless emails. Taking a deep breath, I began sorting through them, creating a mental map of what had transpired in my absence. From Thomas, a progression from irritation to panic to remorse. "Mom, call me back. Where exactly are you staying in Italy? We need to talk about what was in that envelope." And finally, "I'm so sorry. We all are. Please just let us know you're safe." From Melissa, emotional pleas that evolved into deeper reflection. "How could you just leave like this? I didn't know about Patricia and Dad, I swear. I keep thinking about all the times you were there for me after David died, and how I've failed to be there for you." From Amber, simple but heartfelt. "I love you, Grandma. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening. Please come home when you're ready." From Victoria, tentative and defensive, then increasingly honest. "Thomas is overreacting to some misunderstandings. I didn't know the full extent of what my mother was doing. And most recently, I've moved out of Mother's guest house. I need to figure out who I am apart from her influence." From Philip, predictably self-centered. "We should talk about these misunderstandings. You're worrying the children with this dramatic disappearance. Patricia and I never meant to hurt you." Nothing approaching a genuine apology or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. And surprisingly, one message from Patricia herself. "Rose, I think we should meet privately when you return. There are aspects of this situation you don't understand." I set the phone down, feeling strangely calm. Their messages revealed so much, not just about the chaos my departure had caused, but about each of their characters and capacity for growth. Thomas, always the problem solver, trying to manage the situation. Melissa, emotional but genuinely reflective. Amber, simple and direct in her love. Victoria, struggling between loyalty to her mother and recognition of wrongdoing. Philip, incapable as always of true accountability. And Patricia, still attempting to control the narrative. I composed a single group message to Thomas, Melissa, and Amber. I'm safe and well, enjoying Italy immensely. I'll contact you when I return in 10 days. Please respect my need for this time alone. To Victoria, separately, I appreciate your message. We'll talk when I return. To Philip and Patricia, nothing at all. Then, I turned my phone off again and went to stand on my balcony, breathing in the night air scented with jasmine and sea salt. Their problems, their feelings, their chaos, none of it was mine to manage. Not anymore. Back in Boston, the Parker family dynamics continued to fracture and realign in Rose's absence. She's alive, at least, Thomas reported, showing Melissa their mother's brief message. They'd taken to meeting regularly for coffee, a habit they'd fallen out of in recent years, as Patricia's brunches and dinners had dominated the family calendar. That's all she has to say? Melissa's voice wavered between hurt and understanding. After nearly 2 weeks of silence? Can you blame her? Thomas stirred his coffee absently. We've treated her like a background character in our lives for years. Now she's finally writing her own story. Across town, Victoria was packing the last of her belongings from the guest house on her mother's estate, where she and Thomas had been living while renovating their main home. A renovation funded largely by Patricia's generosity, which now felt like carefully disguised control. You're making a mistake, Patricia insisted, watching her daughter fold designer clothes into suitcases. The normally immaculate Patricia looked uncharacteristically disheveled, her careful facade cracking under the strain of exposure. Everything I've done has been for this family's benefit. That's the problem, Mother, Victoria replied, her voice tired but resolute. You decided what benefit meant without considering anyone else's feelings or autonomy, especially Rose's. Rose, Patricia scoffed. She's manipulating all of you with this vanishing act. Can't you see that? Victoria paused, studying her mother with new eyes. That's projection, Mother. You're describing your own tactics, not hers. Across the city, in his downtown condo, Philip paced anxiously, phone in hand. The past 2 weeks had been disastrous for him professionally and personally. Patricia had cut him off completely once their scheme was exposed, leaving him without the financial support he'd grown accustomed to. Several of his colleagues at the community college had received anonymous emails detailing his attempt to manipulate his ex-wife's inheritance, leading to an uncomfortable meeting with the department chair about ethical standards. Most concerning was his lawyer's revelation that Rose's inheritance, the money he and Patricia had been so eager to access, had been partly used to fund her Italian trip, with the remainder placed in an irrevocable trust benefiting only her grandchildren's education, completely bypassing both Thomas and Melissa. The maneuver, executed just before her departure, was legally unassailable. For the first time in decades, Philip faced the prospect of living with the actual consequences of his actions, without a woman, whether Rose, his short-lived second wife, or Patricia, to buffer him from reality. Meanwhile, Amber sat cross-legged on her bed, scrolling through old family photos on her laptop. There was Grandma Rose at her kindergarten graduation, beaming with pride. There she was teaching 8-year-old Amber to make Christmas cookies. There she was, always slightly off-center in family photos, as if unconsciously making herself smaller, less obtrusive. I see you now, Grandma, Amber whispered to the images. And when you come home, I'll make sure you know it. Across Rose's empty house, a sense of suspended animation had settled, like a stage set awaiting its principal actor's return, with the supporting cast increasingly aware that the script they'd been following had been fundamentally flawed all along. The eternal city embraced me with its chaotic energy, honking Vespas weaving through narrow streets, centuries-old fountains splashing beside espresso bars, the weight of history pressing against modern life at every turn. Rome, unlike the gentler landscapes of Tuscany and Amalfi, demanded engagement. It felt fitting for the final days of my journey, as I too prepared to re-engage with the life awaiting me back home. Last night in paradise, sighed Margot, as our group shared a farewell dinner at a trattoria tucked in a cobblestone alley near the Pantheon. Though I suspect for some of us, the real journey begins when we return. Her knowing glance found me across the table. I'd finally shared the complete story of my departure with our small circle of travelers, finding unexpected solace in their unbiased perspectives. "I'm not the same woman who left Boston," I admitted, twirling pasta around my fork. "I'm just not sure what that means for everyone waiting for me." "It means boundaries, darling," said Edward, one half of the gay couple who'd become my unexpected confidants. Magnificent, glorious, non-negotiable boundaries. His husband, Richard, nodded sagely. "The people who truly love you will adjust. The ones who only loved what you did for them, well, they'll have some growing to do." After dinner, while the others returned to the hotel, I found myself drawn to the Trevi Fountain. Despite the late hour, tourists clustered around the Baroque masterpiece, tossing coins and snapping photos. Finding a small space on the edge, I fished a euro coin from my purse. Tradition held that 1 coin ensured a return to Rome. 2 coins promised new romance, and 3 guaranteed marriage. I smiled at the superstition, then tossed a single coin over my shoulder. Not because I particularly believed, but because I wanted to acknowledge that this journey had changed me in ways that deserved some small ceremony. The coin splashed into the illuminated water, joining thousands of others, thousands of wishes, hopes, intentions. Mine wasn't a wish for return, though. It was a commitment to carry this newfound sense of self back into the life that awaited me. My phone vibrated in my pocket, the first time I'd carried it with me in days. A text from Thomas. "Airport pickup confirmed for Thursday. Just me, as you requested." I'd finally made contact 2 days earlier, setting clear parameters for my return. I would not be walking into a dramatic family gathering. I would not be immediately thrust back into the role of mediator, emotional caretaker, or family linchpin. I would return on my terms, dealing with each relationship individually. Some things couldn't wait for face-to-face conversations, however. Earlier that day, I'd finally responded to Patricia's message requesting a private meeting. "There is nothing to discuss," I'd written. "You deliberately isolated me from my family for your own gain. You conspired with my ex-husband to access my inheritance. You scheduled competing events to ensure I'd be alone on holidays and birthdays. These aren't misunderstandings, but calculated actions intended to harm me and exploit my children and grandchildren. I have no interest in hearing your justifications." Her response had been immediate and revealing. "You've always played the victim so well, Rose. Funny how everyone sympathizes with the selfless martyr without questioning why she needs to be seen that way. There are 2 sides to every story. Your children came to me because I offered what you couldn't, freedom from your suffocating need to be needed." The message had stung, not because it was true, but because it contained just enough distortion of truth to make me pause. Had my dedication to my family sometimes veered into dependency? Had I unconsciously cultivated their reliance on me to fulfill my own need for purpose? Standing now before the magnificent cascade of the Trevi Fountain, I allowed these uncomfortable questions to surface. Growth didn't come from defending against all criticism, but from sifting through it for valuable insights. Yes, perhaps I had derived too much identity from being the family caretaker. Perhaps I had sometimes enabled dependency rather than fostering independence. These were patterns worth examining and adjusting. But Patricia's manipulation and Philip's betrayal remained inexcusable, regardless of any role I might have played in creating vulnerability to their schemes. Recognizing my own patterns didn't mean accepting blame for others' deliberate cruelty. This clarity felt like the final gift of my Italian sojourn, the ability to hold complex, sometimes contradictory truths simultaneously. I could acknowledge my imperfections while still standing firm in my worth. I could love my family deeply while requiring them to treat me with respect. I could forgive without forgetting. My last night in Rome, I packed methodically, mentally preparing for re-entry into my life, a life that would need significant recalibration. The woman returning to Boston was not the same one who had fled 3 weeks earlier. The question was whether my family would recognize this transformation, and whether they had undergone transformations of their own. Patricia Henderson had never been refused entrance anywhere in her adult life. Yet here she stood on Rose's front porch, facing Thomas's implacable expression as he blocked the doorway. "She's not even home yet," he said flatly. "And when she is, she'll decide if and when she wants to see you." "This is ridiculous," Patricia snapped. "We're adults. We should be able to sit down and discuss this situation rationally." There's nothing rational about what you and Dad did, Thomas replied. And frankly, I'm still deciding whether I want you in my life, let alone whether Mom should have to face you. Patricia's carefully maintained composure slipped. After everything I've done for you and Victoria, the connections I've provided, the vacations, the private schools for the twins, you mean the bribes? Thomas's voice hardened. The strings-attached generosity designed to pull us away from Mom and position yourself as the family matriarch? That woman has manipulated all of you for years with her self-sacrificing routine. Patricia hissed. Poor Rose, always giving, never taking. Have you never wondered why she needs to be seen that way? Why she can't just be happy without being everyone's savior? Thomas studied his mother-in-law with new clarity. You know what I've realized these past weeks? You and Mom represent completely different kinds of strength. Hers comes from giving when she can. Yours comes from taking whatever you want. Victoria doesn't share your simplistic view, Patricia said, regrouping. She understands family loyalty. Actually, I do, came Victoria's voice as she appeared behind Thomas. I just finally understand which family deserves that loyalty. Patricia's face hardened. You'll regret taking her side. Both of you will. That's the difference between you and Rose, Thomas said quietly. She never made us choose sides. You created sides where none needed to exist. As Patricia stalked back to her luxury SUV, Victoria leaned against Thomas, a subtle tremor running through her. That was harder than I expected. You did the right thing, he assured her, though his own voice betrayed uncertainty. Their marriage had been severely tested these past weeks, as Victoria struggled to separate from her mother's influence while Thomas processed his anger over her complicity. Across town, in Melissa's apartment, Amber was helping her mother prepare for Rose's return, cleaning, arranging fresh flowers, baking Rose's favorite lemon cake. Do you think she'll forgive us? Melissa asked, her voice small as she frosted the cake. Amber considered the question seriously. I think Grandma's never really been about forgiveness or punishment. She's about love with accountability. She'll love us regardless, but things will be different. When did you get so wise? Melissa marveled at her daughter. Probably around the time I watched my grandmother get on a plane to Italy by herself at 65 after being taken for granted by everyone who was supposed to love her, Amber replied with gentle bluntness. That kind of thing tends to clarify perspectives. Meanwhile, Philip sat in his condo, staring at the typed letter he'd spent days crafting. Unlike Patricia, he harbored no illusions about immediate reconciliation with Rose. 20 years as her ex-husband had taught him that, while she didn't hold grudges, she also didn't forget lessons learned. The letter wasn't really an apology. Philip wasn't capable of the level of self-reflection that would require. Instead, it was a carefully worded request that she not permanently damage his relationship with their children through whatever she might say upon her return. Even now, he was thinking of himself, his image, his comfort, his relationships. The irony that this self-centeredness had cost him his marriage, alienated his children, and destroyed his relationship with Patricia remained beyond his grasp. As Rose's plane crossed the Atlantic, the constellation of people affected by her absence prepared for her return, some with genuine remorse and determination to change, others with strategies to manage the fallout, and a few with the dawning recognition that the family dynamic had been permanently altered. What none of them fully grasped was that the woman returning to them had undergone the most profound transformation of all. The familiar skyline of Boston appeared through the airplane window, stirring a complex mixture of emotions. After 3 weeks of liberation, I was returning, not to resume my former life, but to forge a new one that honored both my responsibilities and my newfound sense of self. Nervous? Asked the woman beside me as we began our descent. Determined, I replied after a moment's consideration. The word felt right on my tongue. Not anxious, not dreading, but purposeful. Passing through customs, I felt an odd sense of displacement. The Rose who had left was a woman defined by her utility to others. The Rose returning carried herself differently. Shoulders back, gaze direct, steps deliberate. Thomas waited beyond the security checkpoint, his tall frame easily visible above the crowd. When our eyes met, his relief was palpable even from a distance. As I approached, I noted the subtle changes in his appearance, the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his posture, the uncertainty in his expression. "Mom," he said simply, reaching for my carry-on bag. Welcome home. The drive from Logan Airport unfolded in careful conversation, Thomas filling me in on practical matters, skirting the emotional landmines we both knew would need addressing eventually. I was grateful for this buffer period, this gradual re-immersion. You look different, he finally ventured as we crossed the Charles River. It's not just the tan. I smiled slightly. 3 weeks of putting yourself first will do that. He glanced at me, then back at the road. We've been talking, Melissa, Victoria, Amber, and I, about how things are going to be different when you came back. I'm glad to hear that, I said, because they will be different. As we turned onto my street, I felt a curious lightness. For the first time in decades, I was returning to my home without immediately assuming responsibility for everyone else's emotional well-being. Whatever awaited me inside, whether family members seeking reconciliation or empty rooms echoing with absence, I would face it on my terms. I told everyone to give you space today, Thomas said as he parked in my driveway. Get settled, rest. We'd like to see you tomorrow if you're up for it. Thank you, I said, genuinely appreciative of this small but significant respect for my boundaries. That's thoughtful. He carried my luggage to the door, hesitating at the threshold. Mom, he began, then stopped, emotion making his voice rough. I'm so sorry for everything. I studied my son's face, the little boy I'd raised now, a middle-aged man confronting his own failings. I know you are. We'll talk about it all, Thomas, but not today. He nodded, accepting this boundary as well. I love you, Mom. I love you too, I replied, meaning it despite everything. That's never been in question. Alone in my house, I moved from room to room, reacquainting myself with the space that had been both haven and prison. The birthday decorations had been removed, the perishable food cleared away. Someone, Melissa, judging by the handwriting, had left a welcome home note on the refrigerator, along with a fresh container of my favorite coffee. In my bedroom, the sheets had been changed, and a small vase of daisies, my favorite, sat on the nightstand. Small gestures of contrition, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement of my return. After unpacking and showering away the travel fatigue, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my garden, which had been meticulously maintained in my absence. The spring flowers were in full bloom, a riot of colors against the green backdrop. Another silent apology, this one likely from Thomas, who knew my attachment to this small sanctuary. My phone chimed with texts welcoming me home. Carefully worded messages from Melissa, Amber, even Victoria. None demanded my time or attention. All expressed genuine gladness at my safe return. Conspicuously absent were messages from Philip or Patricia. As twilight settled over the garden, I found myself surprisingly at peace. The confrontations would come. The relationships would need rebuilding. The boundaries would require reinforcement. But tonight, in this moment, I was simply Rose. Not mother, not grandmother, not ex-wife, just a woman returning from a journey, forever changed by the landscapes she had traversed, both external and internal. The next morning, I awoke naturally, without an alarm, a luxury I decided then and there would become routine rather than exception. After a leisurely breakfast, I called Melissa. Mom, she answered immediately, her voice a mixture of relief and trepidation. How are you? How was your flight? Good on both counts, I replied. I thought we might meet for lunch, just the two of us. I'd love that, she said too quickly, revealing her eagerness to make amends. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes, neutral territory for what promised to be a difficult conversation. Melissa arrived first, fidgeting with her napkin, rising awkwardly when she saw me approach. You look wonderful, she said, embracing me briefly. Italy agrees with you. It does, I confirmed, sitting across from her. It reminded me who I am, apart from everyone else's needs and expectations. Melissa flinched slightly at this, her gaze dropping to her hands. I deserve that. It wasn't meant as a rebuke, I clarified, just a truth I've reclaimed. Over salads and iced tea, we navigated the new terrain of our relationship. Melissa spoke of her shock at discovering Philip and Patricia's manipulation, her shame at having been so easily diverted from our relationship, her grief at realizing how profoundly I'd been hurt by her neglect. After David died, she said, her voice catching on her late husband's name even after all these years, you were everything to Amber and me. You held us together. And somehow, we repaid that by gradually pushing you to the periphery of our lives. Patricia offered things I couldn't, I acknowledged, remembering the woman's cutting message. Glamour, connections, luxury experiences. I understand the appeal. But she never offered unconditional love, Melissa countered. Everything came with strings, with expectations, with subtle obligations. I just didn't see it until it was laid bare. I reached across the table to take her hand. We're both partly responsible for the distance that grew between us. I enabled patterns that weren't healthy, making myself indispensable, prioritizing everyone's needs above my own, never requiring the reciprocity I deserved. Melissa's eyes widened slightly at my candor. You've really changed. I've awakened, I corrected gently, to my own worth, to the relationships I want, to the life I deserve. Where does that leave us? She asked, vulnerability plain in her expression. In a better place, I hope, I replied. One where I love you no less fiercely, but more honestly, where I support you without enabling dependence, where I expect to be valued, not just needed. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'd like that. I'd like to really see you, Mom. Not just what you can do for me. That's a good place to start, I said, squeezing her hand before releasing it. As we parted, Melissa hesitated, then asked the question I knew had been weighing on her. Have you heard from Dad? No, I replied honestly. Nor do I expect to. He wants to explain himself, she said, her tone making clear her opinion of such explanations. There's nothing to explain, I said simply. His actions with Patricia revealed his character, just as they did 20 years ago when he left. The only difference is that this time, I'm not devastated by the revelation. Melissa studied me with new understanding. You really are free of him, aren't you? For the first time, I realized the truth of this. Philip's betrayal with Patricia hadn't wounded me the way his initial abandonment had. It had merely confirmed what I should have accepted long ago, that his capacity for loyalty and genuine care had always been limited by his profound self-interest. Yes, I said, the realization bringing a quiet satisfaction. I believe I am. As Melissa walked to her car, I remained at the cafe table, savoring my iced tea and the simple pleasure of a conversation in which I'd spoken my truth without filtering it through concern for others' comfort. One relationship beginning to reset, several more still to navigate. Rome, as they say, wasn't built in a day, neither would the new architecture of my family relationships. The weekend after my return brought sunny spring weather that coaxed tulips and daffodils into brilliant display across my garden. I'd spent the previous days in careful, individual conversations with family members. Lunch with Melissa, coffee with Thomas, an evening walk with Amber. Each interaction had been honest, sometimes painful, but ultimately healing. Today would be different. Today, for the first time, I would see them all together. Thomas and Victoria with the twins, Melissa and Amber, for a casual afternoon gathering I'd suggested. Not a formal family meeting to hash out grievances, but not quite a normal family get-together either. Something in between, a tentative rebuilding. I'd been explicit about one thing. Neither Philip nor Patricia was welcome. That boundary, at least, was non-negotiable. As I arranged simple refreshments on the patio table, I heard Victoria's voice drift through the garden gate. Remember what we talked about, she was saying quietly, presumably to the twins. Grandma Rose has been through a lot. I smiled to myself, appreciating this small evidence of change. The Victoria I'd known before Italy would never have prepared her children to be considerate of my feelings. They entered the garden hesitantly, Thomas carrying a bouquet of flowers, Victoria holding a bakery box, the 12-year-old twins Lucas and Sophie trailing behind with matching uncertain expressions. Welcome, I said warmly, genuinely glad to see them despite everything. The twins rushed forward first, their initial hesitation dissolving into enthusiastic hugs. Grandma, did you see the Colosseum? Lucas asked excitedly. Did you fight any gladiators? I laughed, ruffling his hair. The gladiators retired a few centuries ago, I'm afraid. Victoria approached next, her usual confident demeanor noticeably subdued. These are for you, she said, offering the bakery box. Cannoli from Modern Pastry. I remembered you mentioning once that they reminded you of your grandmother. The thoughtful gesture, recalling a detail I'd shared years ago in passing, caught me by surprise. Thank you, Victoria. That's very kind. Thomas hung back slightly, watching the interaction with a mixture of hope and wariness. The dynamics between Victoria and me had always been the most strained, built on mutual tolerance rather than genuine affection. Melissa and Amber arrived moments later, completing our circle. As everyone settled around the patio table, I noticed the subtle reconfiguration of allegiances and connections. Victoria sitting closer to Melissa than she normally would have, the two of them sharing a look that suggested newfound understanding. Amber positioning herself protectively near me, Thomas watching everyone with the careful attention of someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. "Before we begin," I said, pouring lemonade into glass tumblers, "I want to thank you all for respecting my request for individual conversations first. It's given me a chance to speak with each of you about your perspectives on what happened. And for us to apologize properly," Amber added firmly, her young face serious. I smiled at my granddaughter, appreciating her directness. "Yes, that too. Now, I didn't invite you here for a formal family meeting, but I do want to say something to all of you together." They fell silent, attention focused on me with an intensity I wasn't accustomed to receiving from them as a group. "My trip to Italy wasn't just about escaping a painful situation," I began. "It was about rediscovering who I am apart from all of you, apart from being needed, being useful, being reliable. I found something there I hadn't even realized I'd lost, my sense of self as a woman with her own desires, dreams, and boundaries." I took a sip of lemonade, choosing my next words carefully. "I love you all deeply. That hasn't changed and won't change. But how I express that love and what I expect in return, that has changed. I won't be the family member who's always available, always accommodating, always putting herself last." Victoria shifted uncomfortably, but nodded in acknowledgement. "I won't compete with Patricia for your time or attention," I continued. "I won't chase relationships that aren't freely given. And I certainly won't tolerate being manipulated, deceived, or taken for granted." "That's more than fair, Mom," Thomas said quietly. "It's the bare minimum," Amber corrected, her loyalty to me undiminished by the weeks of family turmoil. "Grandma deserves so much more than just not being treated badly." I reached over to squeeze her hand, touched by her fierce advocacy. "What I'm saying is that I'm establishing boundaries, something I should have done years ago. And while I'm open to rebuilding our relationships, they need to be built on honesty, reciprocity, and genuine care." Melissa wiped away a tear. "We want that too, Mom. All of us." Victoria, who had remained largely silent, finally spoke. "I owe you the biggest apology, Rose. I allowed my mother to use me as a wedge in this family. I participated in isolating you, even if I didn't fully understand what was happening." Her admission, offered without excuses or qualifications, surprised me. "Thank you for acknowledging that, Victoria. I've moved out of her guest house permanently," she continued. "Thomas and I are looking for a new home, something within our actual means, not subsidized by my mother's generosity." She faltered on the last word, perhaps realizing for the first time how Patricia's financial support had functioned as control. "What about Christmas this year?" Sophie piped up suddenly, her 12-year-old mind jumping ahead to practical concerns. "Will we still have it at Grandmother Patricia's house?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. The question, innocent but pointed, highlighted the practical implications of the family's fracture. "That's something your parents will need to decide," I said gently, rescuing Thomas and Victoria from the awkward moment. "But whatever they decide, I'll be having my own celebration here, and you're all welcome." "I vote for Grandma Rose's house," Lucas declared with the decisive certainty of youth. "Patricia's house has fancier stuff, but we can't touch anything. It's boring." A ripple of laughter broke the tension, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics: my Italian adventures, the twins' upcoming soccer tournament, Amber's college plans. As the afternoon progressed, I observed the subtle dance of our family recalibrating, testing new boundaries, discovering new connections, navigating the altered landscape of our relationships. When they departed a few hours later, I felt tired but hopeful. There had been no dramatic confrontations, no tearful group hugs, no sweeping declarations of transformation, just small, genuine moments of connection and respect that suggested possibility. That evening, as I pruned some overgrown roses in the fading light, I heard the garden gate open again. Turning, I found Victoria standing there alone, uncertainty written across her face. "I'm sorry to come back unannounced," she said. I needed to speak with you privately." I gestured to the bench beside the rose trellis. "Of course." She sat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "There's something I didn't say earlier, with everyone there. Something I need you to know." I waited, pruning shears still in hand. "My mother," Victoria began, then stopped, gathering courage. "She's not who any of us thought she was. Since everything came out about her and Philip, I've discovered other things. Financial manipulations, lies about her past, relationships she's poisoned beyond my father's. That doesn't surprise me," I said gently. "It should have surprised me," Victoria replied, her voice catching. "But on some level I've always known. I just chose not to see it because the alternative was too frightening." "What alternative is that?" "That I might be like her," Victoria whispered, giving voice to what I suspected was her deepest fear. "That I might have that same capacity for manipulation, for using people, for putting appearances above authentic connection." I set down my shears and turned to face her fully. "Victoria, the fact that you're here, having this conversation, already proves you're not your mother." "How can you be sure?" Her question held genuine anguish. "Because Patricia would never question herself this way," I said simply. "She would never recognize her own patterns, let alone try to change them." Victoria absorbed this, a glimmer of hope softening her features. "I want to be better, for Thomas, for the twins, and," she hesitated, "for you too, if you'll let me try." In that vulnerable moment, I saw beyond the polished exterior Victoria had always presented, beyond the daughter-in-law who had tolerated me while gravitating toward her mother's more glamorous influence. I saw a woman confronting painful truths about her upbringing, her choices, and her potential for change. "I'd like that," I said, surprising both of us with my sincerity. As Victoria left, I returned to my roses, carefully removing dead growth to make space for new blooms. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens emerge after the most ruthless pruning. The letter arrived exactly 2 weeks after my return from Italy. Heavy cream stationery, with Patricia Henderson's monogrammed return address embossed in gold in the corner. It sat on my entry table, where the mail carrier had pushed it through the slot, its presence somehow dominating the space despite its modest size. I let it sit untouched while I went about my morning routine. Coffee in the garden, a chapter of the novel I was reading, a call with Margot to share updates on our post-Italy lives. Only after these pleasurable rituals did I return to the envelope, slicing it open with the letter opener my students had given me upon my retirement. Patricia's handwriting was as precise and controlled as the woman herself. "Rose, while you've made it clear you have no interest in hearing my perspective, I find myself compelled to offer it nonetheless. The narrative that has taken hold in our family, that I maliciously plotted to isolate you from your children and grandchildren, is a simplistic interpretation of a complex situation. The truth is that I simply offered what you could not: social connections, cultural experiences, financial guidance. That your family gravitated toward these offerings speaks to their natural desires, not to any manipulation on my part. As for Philip, surely you of all people understand his weaknesses. Our connection, while ill-advised, was hardly the grand conspiracy you've painted it to be. We are two lonely people who found comfort in each other's company. Your dramatic departure to Italy has certainly achieved its intended effect. My relationship with Victoria is damaged, potentially beyond repair. My standing in this family has been diminished. If vengeance was your goal, congratulations are in order. I propose a truce. We are both intelligent women of a certain age. Surely we can find a civilized way forward that doesn't involve continuing to fracture this family. I suggest a private meeting, at a location of your choosing, to discuss how we might coexist peacefully for the sake of those we both care about. Patricia Henderson. I read the letter twice, noting its careful construction, the strategic admissions cushioned by deflections, the subtle victim positioning, the framing of my actions as vengeance rather than self-preservation. It was masterfully done, revealing far more about Patricia than she likely intended. Setting the letter aside, I considered my options. Ignoring it would be simplest. Responding with anger would be satisfying, but ultimately unproductive. Agreeing to meet would potentially open a door I'd firmly closed. Yet something in me, perhaps the new Rose who had emerged in Italy, Perhaps the teacher who had spent decades recognizing teachable moments felt a certain clarity was needed, not for Patricia's benefit, but for my own. I picked up my phone and composed a text to Victoria. Your mother has written asking to meet. Before I respond, I'd like to know if this would complicate things for you. Her reply came quickly. Please don't let my situation influence your decision. I'm working through my relationship with her in therapy. Whatever you decide, I support you. Another small evidence of change. The Victoria of 3 months ago would never have acknowledged needing therapy, let alone respected my autonomy so explicitly. After careful consideration, I drafted my response to Patricia on my own stationery, simple white paper with just my name at the top. No embellishments, no pretense. Patricia, I've received your letter and considered your request for a meeting. I'm willing to meet, not to negotiate a truce as you suggest, but to provide the clarity that seems to be missing from your understanding of recent events. Let me be entirely direct. I did not go to Italy for vengeance. I went for myself, to reclaim the time, energy, and identity that had been gradually eroded through years of putting others first. That this journey catalyzed changes in family dynamics was inevitable, but not its primary purpose. You write that you simply offered what I could not. This framing suggests a competition I never consented to enter. My relationships with my children and grandchildren should never have been treated as a zero-sum game where your gain required my loss. As for Philip, I harbor no illusions about his character. Our marriage ended 20 years ago for good reason. What concerns me is not your relationship with him, but your joint discussions about accessing my inheritance, conversations you've not addressed in your letter. If you still wish to meet after this clarification, I'm available Tuesday at 2 p.m. at the Willowbrook Tea Room. This will be a one-time conversation. I have no interest in an ongoing relationship with you, but I am willing to establish clear boundaries that will allow family gatherings to proceed without unnecessary tension. Rose Parker. I mailed the letter that afternoon, feeling neither anxiety nor anticipation about the potential meeting. Whatever Patricia's response, I was secure in my position. Not defensive, not attacking, simply clear about my boundaries and expectations. 3 days later, I sat at a corner table in the Willowbrook Tea Room, a pot of Earl Grey steaming gently before me. I'd arrived early, selecting a location that offered both privacy and the security of public surroundings. At precisely 2 p.m., Patricia entered, her appearance as immaculate as ever despite the subtle signs of strain around her eyes. Rose, she acknowledged, taking the seat opposite me. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Thank you for being punctual, I replied, pouring tea for us both. No sense in pretending this was a social occasion between friends. Patricia took a measured sip, then set her cup down with deliberate care. I'll be direct. The situation has become untenable. Victoria barely speaks to me. The twins haven't visited in weeks. Even my social circle has been affected. Apparently, attempting to steal a grandmother's family makes for scandalous gossip at charity luncheons. That would be difficult, I acknowledged without sympathy, though I'm curious why you've framed this entirely in terms of its impact on you. A flash of irritation crossed her face. Would you prefer I pretend this has been beneficial for anyone? The family is fractured. Surely that wasn't your intention. The family was already fractured, I corrected her. The difference is that now it's happening openly rather than through subtle manipulations behind my back. Patricia sighed, adjusting her strategy. Look, Rose, we both care about this family, albeit in different ways. Can't we find some arrangement that allows everyone to move forward? That's precisely why I agreed to meet, I replied. Not to rehash the past or debate who wronged whom, but to establish clear parameters for the future. I removed a folded paper from my purse and placed it on the table between us. These are my boundaries. They're non-negotiable, but they're also reasonable. I won't attempt to prevent anyone from having a relationship with you if they choose to. I won't speak ill of you to the grandchildren. I won't create competing events designed to force family members to choose between us. Patricia glanced at the paper without touching it. And what do you expect from me in return? The same courtesy. No more strategic scheduling of events to conflict with mine. No more undermining comments about me to family members. No more financial entanglements designed to create obligation or dependency. You make me sound positively Machiavellian, Patricia remarked, a hint of her usual composure returning. Perhaps because your actions have been exactly that, I replied calmly. Whether you're willing to acknowledge it or not. She picked up the paper finally, scanning its contents. And if I agree to these boundaries, what then? We pretend to tolerate each other at family gatherings? Exchange pleasantries while secretly despising one another? We don't need to pretend anything, I said. Mutual respect doesn't require personal affection. We simply need to recognize that our connections to this family exist independently of each other. Patricia studied me with new calculation. You've changed, Rose. I'm not sure I would have recognized this version of you 3 months ago. That's probably true, I acknowledged. Italy was transformative, though not in the way you seem to think. It wasn't about plotting revenge or strategizing my return. It was about remembering who I am apart from everyone else's needs and expectations. Something shifted in Patricia's expression, not softening exactly, but a recognition of something she perhaps hadn't considered before. And who is that exactly? Who is Rose Parker when she's not being the selfless mother and grandmother? The question might have been intended as a barb, but I received it as an opportunity for the clarity I'd sought in this meeting. She's a woman who values authentic connection over social status, who finds joy in simple pleasures rather than extravagant displays, who believes relationships should be built on mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. I met her gaze directly. She's a woman who no longer needs everyone's approval, including yours. Patricia looked away first, a concession I would never have expected from her. Well, she said finally, refolding the paper with precise movements, at least we understand each other. Yes, I agreed. I believe we do. As she gathered her designer handbag and prepared to leave, Patricia paused. For what it's worth, Philip was the one who suggested targeting your inheritance. That was never my idea. I smiled slightly at this final attempt to create division. It doesn't matter whose idea it was, you both participated, and neither of you succeeded. After she departed, I remained at the table, finishing my tea with a sense of completion rather than victory. The confrontation I'd once dreaded had proven to be neither as difficult nor as satisfying as anticipated. Instead, it had simply confirmed what Italy had taught me, that the power others held over me had always been power I'd given them, and what is freely given can be reclaimed just as freely. June unfurled in a tapestry of longer days and warmer temperatures, gardens bursting into riotous bloom, neighborhood children released from school into the freedom of summer. 2 months had passed since my return from Italy, and life had settled into new patterns, some comfortably familiar, others refreshingly different. I'd established a routine that prioritized my own well-being alongside family connections. Mondays were reserved for a book club I'd joined with several fellow retired teachers. Wednesdays, I volunteered at the community garden near the high school where I'd taught for decades. Thursdays, I took an art class, discovering a passion for watercolors that had lain dormant since college. Weekends often included family visits, but always on terms that respected my other commitments and interests. The anniversary of David's death, Melissa's husband, Amber's father, fell on a perfect summer Tuesday, 7 years since the heart attack that had taken him at 39. Traditionally, this somber milestone had been marked by a quiet dinner at my house, where I'd prepare David's favorite foods and create space for Melissa and Amber to share memories and grief. This year, however, brought a surprising shift. "Mom," Melissa said during our weekly phone call the Sunday before, "I was thinking about Tuesday. Would you mind if we did something different this year?" "Of course not," I replied, curious about the tentative hope I heard in her voice. "What did you have in mind?" "David always talked about taking us sailing on the harbor, but we never got around to it. I found this sunset memorial cruise where families can scatter flowers in memory of loved ones." She paused. "I thought it might be nice, a way to honor him that feels alive somehow. And I'd like to invite Thomas and his family too, if that's okay." The old Rose might have felt slighted by this change to a tradition I'd carefully maintained. The new Rose recognized this for what it was, not a rejection of my support, but a healthy step in Melissa's healing journey. "I think that sounds wonderful," I told her sincerely. "David would have loved it. We could all meet at your house first," she suggested quickly, perhaps concerned I might feel excluded. "Have a light dinner before the cruise." "Actually," I countered gently, "why don't you and Amber come here for lunch instead? That gives us time together first, but makes the sailing the main event rather than an addition to our usual tradition. The subtle repositioning, from host of the entire commemoration to participant in Melissa's new vision, felt right. Supporting without centralizing myself, present without being essential. Tuesday dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for sailing. Melissa and Amber arrived for lunch, bringing framed photos of David to place on the table, a thoughtful inclusion of our traditional elements within the new approach. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot," Amber said as we shared the simple meal I'd prepared. "Not just missing him, but wondering what he'd think about everything that's happened these past months." "What do you think he'd say?" I asked, watching my granddaughter's expressive face. She considered this seriously. "I think he'd be really proud of you, Grandma, for standing up for yourself, for not letting yourself be pushed aside." A smile touched her lips. "He always said you were the strongest person he knew, even though you never made a big deal about it." Melissa nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "He admired you so much, Mom. He used to tell me I was lucky to have a mother who showed me what quiet strength looked like." The revelation touched me deeply. David had been a wonderful son-in-law, kind, hard-working, devoted to Melissa and Amber, but I'd never known he held me in such high regard. "Thank you for telling me that," I said softly. "It means a great deal." Later, as we boarded the memorial cruise boat with Thomas, Victoria, and the twins, I observed how naturally we'd adapted to our reconfigured family dynamic. Victoria and Melissa, once distant due to Patricia's subtle positioning, now conversed easily. The twins, freed from the strict behavioral expectations at Patricia's house, displayed genuine affection for their aunt and cousin, rather than the formal politeness they'd previously exhibited. Most revealing was a brief exchange I overheard between Thomas and Melissa as we found seats on the boat's upper deck. "Mom seems different lately," Melissa remarked, unaware I was within earshot. "Happier, more present somehow." Thomas nodded. "Victoria says it's because she's finally living for herself instead of through us, that she's found her center again. Do you think she'll ever truly forgive us for taking her for granted for so long?" "I think," Thomas replied thoughtfully, "she already has. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to how things were. It means moving forward with new understanding." His insight surprised and pleased me. My son had been doing some significant reflection of his own. As the boat glided across the harbor, the setting sun gilding the water in molten gold, each family member took turns sharing memories of David. The twins recalled fishing trips with their Uncle Dave when they were small. Victoria spoke of his kindness when she first joined the family. Thomas remembered his brother-in-law's unfailing good humor and integrity. When my turn came, I shared something I'd never told them before. How David had come to me privately before proposing to Melissa, not to ask permission in some outdated patriarchal tradition, but to make a promise. He said, "Rose, I want you to know that I'll spend my life trying to be worthy of her. Not perfect, but worthy." My voice caught slightly at the memory, and he was. Every day he was given with her, he kept that promise. Melissa's tears fell freely then, but they were the healing tears of love remembered rather than the desperate grief of earlier anniversaries. As she and Amber scattered white rose petals on the darkening water, I stood slightly apart, present, but not central to their moment of remembrance. A hand slipped into mine. Victoria, her own eyes damp. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" I asked, surprised by the gesture. "For showing me what real family support looks like. Not controlling, not demanding, just there, present without taking over." The simple observation confirmed what I'd been gradually learning since Italy, that genuine strength wasn't found in making oneself indispensable, but in creating space for others to find their own capacity while remaining steadfastly present. As we sailed back to shore under a canopy of emerging stars, I reflected on how profoundly our family dynamics had shifted. The painful rupture precipitated by my discovery of Patricia and Philip's manipulation had ultimately created space for healthier connections, more authentic communication, and genuine appreciation for each other's autonomy. One tradition had been transformed today, reimagined to better serve its purpose of honoring David's memory while respecting Melissa and Amber's evolving grief. Other traditions would likely follow: holidays, birthdays, celebrations, each renegotiated with new awareness of what truly mattered, not who hosted or who controlled, but how present we were for each other in both joy and sorrow. The boat docked in the harbor lights, our small family group disembarking together, connected not by obligation or habit, but by choice and genuine affection. As we said our goodbyes in the parking lot, making plans for Sunday brunch at Thomas and Victoria's new, more modest home, I felt a deep contentment that had nothing to do with being needed and everything to do with being valued. This, I realized, was the true inheritance I'd received. Not my father's money, which had funded my transformation in Italy, but the opportunity to rebuild my family relationships on a foundation of mutual respect rather than dependency and obligation. Some might view it as a high price to have paid for this wisdom, but standing under the star-filled sky, surrounded by family members who were finally seeing me as I truly was, it felt like the most worthwhile investment I'd ever made. On the morning of my 66th birthday, I awoke to find a small envelope slipped under my bedroom door. Inside was a handwritten note from Amber, who had stayed overnight. Operation Birthday Redemption begins at 9 a.m. Dress comfortably and be ready for adventure. Love, your co-conspirator. I smiled at my granddaughter's dramatic flair, appreciating the thoughtfulness behind her secrecy. After dressing in comfortable slacks and a light sweater, I found Amber in the kitchen, mysteriously stirring something on the stove. "Happy birthday, Grandma," she said, giving me a tight hug. "I'm making your favorite blueberry pancakes, the ones you taught me to make when I was little." "They smell wonderful," I replied, touched by the role reversal. For so many years, I had been the one preparing special birthday breakfasts for everyone else. "This is just the beginning," she assured me with an enigmatic smile. "The family has been planning for weeks." After breakfast, a text from Melissa directed us to meet her at the Boston Public Garden. There, beside the swan boats, stood my daughter holding a picnic basket and a bouquet of daisies. "Happy birthday, Mom," she said, embracing me warmly. I thought we'd start with something simple, but meaningful. The three of us enjoyed a leisurely boat ride followed by a picnic under flowering trees. As we finished our lunch, Melissa handed me a small wrapped package. "It's not much," she said, suddenly shy. "Just something I thought you might appreciate." Inside was a journal bound in soft Italian leather. "I noticed you keeping a travel journal in the photos you shared from Italy," she explained. "I thought you might want a new one for your next adventure." "My next adventure?" I asked, running my fingers over the buttery leather. Melissa and Amber exchanged knowing glances. "That's part of the surprise," Amber said. "You'll find out later." A text from Thomas directed us to our next destination, the Museum of Fine Arts, where he and Victoria waited in the gallery housing Monet's water lilies, which I'd always loved. "We thought you might enjoy an hour of art appreciation," Victoria explained, handing me a small gift bag containing a set of premium watercolor brushes, a thoughtful acknowledgement of my new painting hobby. As we wandered through the galleries, I noticed something remarkable. Everyone was fully present. No one checked phones or seemed distracted by other obligations. Their attention was genuine, their engagement complete. Later, we met the twins at a nearby cafe known for its authentic Italian gelato. Sophie and Lucas presented me with handmade cards and a playlist they'd created titled Songs for Grandma's Next Adventure, another mysterious reference to something I was apparently not yet supposed to know about. As evening approached, Thomas suggested we all return to my house to freshen up before dinner. When we arrived, I was surprised to find my garden transformed. Twinkling lights strung between trees, a table elegantly set on the patio, tantalizing aromas drifting from the kitchen. "Surprise!" the family chorused as I took in the scene. "We thought about taking you to a restaurant," Thomas explained. "But then we realized this is where family celebrations should happen. In your home, which has always been the heart of our family. But," Victoria added quickly, "we're doing all the work. You're the guest of honor tonight." As I was ushered to a comfortable chair with a glass of Prosecco, I watched my family work together with surprising coordination. Thomas and Lucas grilled on the patio, while Victoria, Melissa, and Sophie arranged platters of antipasti. Amber acted as hostess, ensuring my glass was filled and regaling me with amusing stories from her freshman year of college. The meal was a loving recreation of the Italian dishes I described from my trip: homemade pasta with fresh basil, grilled vegetables drizzled with olive oil, crusty bread for soaking up sauces. They'd clearly put significant effort into researching recipes and techniques. This is beautiful, I said, genuinely moved. Thank you all. There's more, Melissa announced as dessert was cleared away. Thomas appeared with a large envelope, which he placed before me with ceremonial solemnity. This is from all of us, he said, a small token of our appreciation for everything you've done, and our acknowledgement that it's time for you to continue the journey you began in Italy. Inside the envelope, I found airline tickets and hotel reservations for 2 weeks in the south of France. Margot mentioned you talked about visiting Provence next, Amber explained, referring to my Italian travel companion with whom I'd maintained a close friendship. She's going to meet you there. We wanted to give you something that wasn't about us, Thomas added. Something just for you, for the woman who's rediscovered herself this past year. Victoria nodded. And we've already arranged coverage for all family responsibilities while you're away. No excuses, no guilt. I looked around the table at their expectant faces, seeing in each a genuine desire to support my continuing journey of self-discovery. A year ago, such a gift would have been unthinkable, not because they wouldn't have considered it, but because none of us would have recognized its necessity. I don't know what to say, I admitted, emotion making my voice unsteady. Say you'll go, Melissa urged. Say you'll continue becoming the Rose Parker who went to Italy and came back stronger. And say you'll forgive us for taking so long to see you clearly, Thomas added quietly. I reached out to take his hand, then Melissa's, forming a chain of connection around the table. There's nothing to forgive anymore. We've all grown this year, not just me. As the evening mellowed into comfortable conversation punctuated by laughter, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From an empty birthday table to this abundant celebration of genuine appreciation and love. The inheritance I'd received from my father had funded my Italian awakening, but the true legacy I'd claim was this: the courage to value myself enough to require others to value me too, and the wisdom to recognize that authentic love thrives best with clear boundaries and mutual respect. 1 year ago, I'd sat alone at a carefully prepared table, invisible to the family I'd devoted myself to for decades. Tonight, I sat at a table prepared for me, truly seen by that same family, not for what I could provide, but simply for who I was. The circle had closed, the lesson was complete, and the journey, beautifully, continued.